Hey guys, Cody here again with Mercury Rising Astrology. We've got Venus going retrograde in Aries on March 1st, where she will retrograde back into Pisces and then station direct on April 2nd. So I wanted to go over what Venus in Aries retrograde might be like for you. I'm going to go over the general themes, and then I'm also going to go over the house placement according to each rising sign and how this retrograde might affect you depending on which house it is stationing retrograde in and which house Venus rules in your chart. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's talk a little bit about Venus, just generally speaking, real quick. A lot of you already probably know some of her general significations, but I want to touch on them once again for those of you that don't. Venus is all about harmony, attraction, beauty, pleasure, relationships, and values. In traditional astrology, she's like the matchmaker, an artist that brings people together, brings ideas together, smooths out conflict, and reminds us kind of what makes life sweet and pleasurable. Venus desires aren't just romantic or, sensual. She governs all things that make us feel comfortable, fulfilled, and connected to others. So if you think of Venus's rulerships of Taurus and Libra, they give you two very different sides of the Venusian themes that fall under the domain of Venus. And so with Taurus, it's earthy, sensual, and grounded things. And with Libra, it's airy, social, and relational things. So in Taurus, she's all about physical pleasures, stability, enjoying the simple things in life. But in Libra, she's about working the room. She's about social connections and balancing those social connections. She's about fairness, diplomacy, and art and aesthetics. Regardless of where she is, Venus's role is to create the ties that bind. In ancient astrology, she was a cohesive force. She brings things together. And so whether this is romantic, familial, societal, aesthetics, she's all about bringing together. And so again, in Hellenistic astrology, she's known as a benefic. She's the lesser benefic. So she brings good things or fortunate things. She prefers peace and connection, sometimes to her detriment. She can dodge conflict or not want to, stir the pot too much because she wants to keep the harmony or the balance of things. So with those themes, when we talk about Venus retrograde, those are some of the basic, mundane, everyday themes that'll be affected by Venus's movement backwards in the sky. So what is Venus retrograde? Venus retrograde is when all things Venusian go through a shift. So instead of her usual forward motion in the sky, she is putting on the brakes and reversing herself, going backwards. And this signifies it's a time to reflect. It can signify reversals, delays, or revisiting old ground or old patterns. It's not necessarily time for new growth when a planet is retrograde. It's more about looking at where you've been and where you've come from, particularly with a Venus retrograde in Venus themes, and how they need to change or what needs to be revised. So we're thinking relationships, self-worth, finances, desires, beauty, values, those types of things. And so expect past experiences, unfinished relationship businesses, and financial concerns to maybe pop up during Venus retrograde. You might run into an ex, very common. You might have somebody reach out that you haven't talked to in a while from your past. You might reconsider how you need love and how you express love, or reflect on what really makes you happy and what you really desire and what you really value. It's almost like hitting a reset button. Not a time to make moves or to, start new things Venusian during this time, but more of a time to align and reflect and making sure that the Venus themes align with your core values before taking action. Venus retrograde happens through like an 8-year cycle. So she goes retrograde almost every year and a quarter, a year and a half, but every 8 years she goes retrograde in the same sign that she did 8 years prior. So if you think back, the Venus retrograde in Aries happened in 2017, 2009, 2001, and 1993, and so on, every 8 years into the back. So it's kind of like a cosmic spiral that every time we come around 8 years in the cycle, the same Venusian themes are going to crop up again for us to revise, reconsider, and build upon. And so it happens in the same area of your chart every time. So she builds on these from the past. So if you want to look back, in 2017, 2009, 2001, and 1993, some of the themes that might have come up for you, those themes might show themselves more than likely again during Venus retrograde in Aries this time around. And so these retrogrades are kind of like checkpoints where you get a chance to reassess how far you've come in terms of these Venusian themes, in terms of your desires, in terms of your values and your relationships and your pleasures and creativity. So it can be a fun exercise to see can check in every 8 years and kind of see where this part of your chart is being activated and what has changed, what hasn't changed, what should change, what needs to change. Now, Venus is going retrograde in Aries, and so it gets a little interesting because Venus doesn't exactly thrive in Aries. She's in her detriment, so she's a little bit uncomfortable. If you think of Libra as being the home of Venus, when she gets to Aries, she's the furthest away from home that she can be. And so this can, be a little bit uncomfortable for her. In Mars-ruled Aries, there's a need to be bold and direct and impulsive, but Venus is harmonious and graceful and doesn't want to vibe with all the fiery active energy of Aries so easily. Aries wants independence and action and immediate gratification, whereas Venus craves connection and balance and ease. So there might be a tension between self-assertion and diplomacy, between independence and connection. And so this retrograde might feel like you're being pulled in two different directions. Are you asserting your needs too forcefully or not enough? Are you holding on to independence at the expense of connecting with other people on a deeper level? Are your desires, whether that's in a career or relationally or creatively, actually aligned with your long-term values? Or are you just acting on short-term impulses that are kind of fueling a sense of immediate gratification? So this retrograde time is really good to get real with yourself. Where can you find a better balance between going after what you want, but maintaining the relationships and the social connections and the values that truly matter to you? This isn't a time about perfection necessarily, especially with a retrograde. There might be mishaps and mistakes and things to revise, but it's about learning how to navigate the tension between the Aries passion and the Venusian peace. So I want to go through each rising sign and kind of touch on some of the topics and some of the themes that might be coming up for each rising sign. So let's start off with my Aries rising, because this is going to directly impact you in a very personal way. It's happening in your first house. Venus will station retrograde there, and this will impact your identity, your appearance, and how you assert yourself and show up in the world. You might experience during this time a heightened sense of awareness, wanting to take maybe bold steps in how you express yourself, but also revisiting some old insecurities, perhaps about how others perceive you or how you relate to others. Impulsiveness during this time could lead to misunderstandings with partners or friends or colleagues, so be mindful of that. Venus will eventually retrograde back into Pisces, into your 12th house, so themes of rest, introspection, and emotional healing might come up during this time. It's a time to reflect on hidden fears or subconscious patterns and unresolved emotional baggage around relationships that might still be affecting how you connect with others and perhaps even your self-worth. Now, in your chart, Venus rules the 2nd house and the 7th house. And so financial decisions and self-worth are key themes during this Venus retrograde. Are you spending money impulsively to validate your identity, or are you not honoring your values in terms of how you're spending? How can those be realigned? And maybe even with ruling your 7th house, there might be this tendency for your partnerships to mirror some kind of inner conflict. You might find yourself being a little too assertive or a little bit too defensive, or maybe even pushing others away. So how can you be mindful of that and connect to people on a, more authentic and open level? So during this time, you might change your appearance impulsively, take a new bold haircut or a new, style to your hair, new color, and then you might second guess it later with Venus going retrograde. Or a past relationship or unresolved issue might come to the surface, requiring you to confront boundaries or confront, fears or anxieties around relationships. And this might be a time where you reassess your financial habits or, keep an eye on how your impulsive purchases are tied to your self-image or your values or your self-esteem. For my Taurus risings, the Venus retrograde is starting off in your 12th house of hidden enemies or self-undoing, private emotional matters, fears and anxieties, those types of things. So those might come to the forefront. You might experience a need for solitude or to process, creative ideas or relationship issues in a way that is secluded and kind of alone. And it could reflect a time where private reflection or secret romances even come to the forefront, but there might also be some inner conflicts. Venus will retrograde out of your 12th house and into your 11th house. And so this will shift a focus towards your friendships and long-term goals. And you might be invited to reassess your social connections and whether or not your aspirations still resonate with your values and what you're trying to achieve. In your chart, Venus rules the first house of self and identity and personality and presentation, and your 6th house of health and illness and work routines and everyday tasks. And so self-identity and, how you present yourself might feature prominently during this Venus retrograde cycle. Are you prioritizing your well-being, or are you, burying your needs in order to please other people? Or are you taking care of your emotional and physical health in a way that's in alignment with your values? Or are you running on empty and maybe, overexerting yourself in your social connections? You might work on a secretive project, that is behind the scenes in some capacity. You might reevaluate your friendships and let go of more superficial connections or draining connections and put a focus on more deep and authentic friendships. And you might find, that you're feeling the need to step back from public life a little bit and focus on inner healing, and particularly in terms of maybe self-worth, desires, and how you relate to other people. For my Gemini risings, this is happening in your 11th house of, again, social connections, groups, alliances, and hopes and wishes for the future. So you might feel yourself driven to pursue bold and collaborative endeavors, or, find yourself relating with other people in a more assertive way. But you might be a little bit impulsive, and this could lead to conflicts with friends or groups that you're involved with. Venus will retrograde into Pisces, which is your 10th house, and so career goals and public reputation might be reassessed during this time, and you might reflect on whether your ambitions align with your values and your emotional well-being. In your chart, Venus rules the 12th house of hidden matters and spiritual growth, and your 5th house of creative and romantic pursuits and pleasurable pursuits. So are you prioritizing your inner world and neglecting your public recognition? There might be this tension between needing to retreat and be, in solitude versus needing to show up in the world and perform. Are you pursuing projects that reflect your true passions? Are you, this with Venus ruling your 5th house, a creative project may find itself in your career or public life in some way. So you might start a bold group project and face creative clashes in that process, or you might reflect on your career path and, possibly step back from public commitments to reassess and to realign. And you might even look at reevaluating your creative or romantic goals and make sure they're in deeper alignment with your values and what you truly desire. For my Cancer risings, the Venus will station retrograde in your 10th house. It'll move into your 9th house, and it rules your 11th and your 4th house. So with Venus stationing retrograde in your 10th house, career, public image, recognition, your outward-facing self is going to be highlighted, and you might feel motivated to take bold moves in your professional life, but there might be a little cart before the horse, and you might need to reassess or face some delays or setbacks with authority figures or bosses or some other kind of 10th house figure in order to navigate that realm moving forward. When Venus retrogrades back into your 9th house, there might be a shift towards education, travel, or spiritual growth. And it's a time to reassess your beliefs, perhaps, and how they might influence your career and your personal ambitions. If we often have a shift in worldview, they often, coincide with a shift in how we want to show up in the world. So this is a reevaluation of those types of themes, especially as they relate to Venus. Ruling your 11th house, friendships and social networks might require attention during this time or be connected to this process. Are your relationships supporting your goals, or are they holding you back, for instance? And ruling your 4th house, home and family might be tied up in this process as well. Are you balancing career success with personal security? How do your beliefs around home and family and career need to change in order to align more clearly with your values? You might launch a creative business during this time, but then find that you're encountering, tension or conflict with the figures needed to help you facilitate that. Or you might be revisiting family traditions or beliefs during deep conversations during this time that shape how you're showing up in the world. And you might find yourself balancing high-profile events with the need for personal grounding and reflection in a time for yourself. For my Leo risings, Venus will station retrograde in your 9th house of higher learning, travel, philosophical exploration, and those types of things. So you might find yourself feeling compelled to expand your horizons, but you might find yourself being a little bit more impulsive in terms of those decisions, and it might lead to some complications. Venus will retrograde from Aries into your 8th house, Pisces, where themes of intimacy, shared resources, fears and anxieties may take center stage. You might reflect on how you trust and how you show up vulnerably in your relationships, and how financial decisions and resources that are intertwined figure into that. Venus rules your 10th house, so career ambitions may conflict with your need for personal growth during this time. And ruling your 3rd house, communication styles and local connections will come into play. Are you effectively expressing your ideas and your ambitions? Are you effectively expressing yourself in intimate relationships and truly expressing your desires? During this time, you might plan an adventurous trip, but face maybe logistical problems or philosophical challenges. You might reflect, on deep emotional bonds that you have, and trust issues may come up in terms of relationships, and they need to be faced and worked through. And you might engage in heated debates about your beliefs or your ambitions with your peers. For my Virgo risings, this is happening in your 8th house. Venus will station retrograde in your 8th house of shared resources, deep emotional connections, fears and anxieties of that type of thing. Financial entanglements and intimacy issues will come to the forefront and need to be revised and looked over. And the Venus retrograde will move into your 7th house of relationships and partnerships, and that'll put the spotlight on that area. And so it might be a time to reassess your emotional needs and your relationship patterns when that time comes. In your chart, Venus rules the 2nd house of finance, resources, and self-worth. So those things might come into question. The stability of those things might be changed a little bit. And with Venus ruling your 9th house of beliefs and religion and spirituality, these themes also might be woven into this process and asking you to question whether or not your values are aligned with your higher learning and your goals and your beliefs about the world. So you might face financial decisions about joint ventures or debts. You might reassess relationship commitments, or trust issues might come up. And there might be a need for deep reflection on your spiritual values and how they affect your intimacy and how you show up in relationships. For my Libra risings, this is happening in your 7th house of relationships and partnerships. So you might feel drawn to bold, new connections that might need to, be let go of or burn out quickly, or create some kind of instability. And then Venus will retrograde into your 6th house, where health routines, illness, or daily work life will take more of a prominent, role in this process, and may ask you to reflect how your habits support your emotional and relational well-being. Venus rules in your chart the 1st house of personal identity and self-expression and the 8th house of vulnerability and shared resources and fears and anxieties. So these themes might require reflection or a reevaluation in terms of your goals and your values during this time. Possible manifestations of this: experiencing a relationship roller coaster. Maybe an ex comes back into your life and it burns hot and fast and chaotic for a while before it needs to be reassessed and let go. You might revise your health routines that, better align with what you value and what you're trying to go after, something that meets your emotional needs perhaps. And you might face unexpected financial or emotional shifts within your partnerships. Venus ruling things like resources and money, and moving from the seventh house of partnerships into the sixth house of toil. There might be a need to reassess how you're working for those things. For my Scorpio risings, this is happening in your sixth house, where your work, daily routines, health, and illness come into the spotlight. You might feel inspired to start bold new projects or routines, but that kind of bold assertiveness can lead to burnout or, not following through perhaps. And there might be conflicts with coworkers or issues of fairness and diplomacy that might arise in the workplace. With Venus retrograding back into your fifth house in Pisces, romance, creativity, pleasures, and joy will take center stage. And it's time to reassess your passions and your creative endeavors and how you express yourself and how you find pleasure and how romance figures into your life, and reassessing those in terms of what you find meaningful and valuable. With Venus ruling your seventh house of partnerships and relationships, and your 12th house of hidden patterns and spiritual growth and subconscious influences, you could find yourself needing to balance, your own needs and the needs of others during this time. And how aware are you of deep emotional patterns and things that might undermine you, that impact your health and your work and your relationships. During this time, you might find yourself overcommitting to work projects and leading to physical or mental exhaustion, and that might manifest as an illness or a sickness. You might realize that health issues have emotional or relational roots, and so getting to those roots might help to solve some of the physical issues that you might be having. And it might reignite a passion for a creative project or a romantic connection that you once put on the back burner or wrote off, that is now coming back. And you're like, maybe that will work out, or maybe I can do that. So that's kind of what I would look at for my Scorpio risings. For my Sagittarius risings, Venus will be stationing retrograde in your fifth house of creative, romantic, pleasurable pursuits. So you might find yourself feeling driven to take risks in these areas and express yourself boldly, but that can also create dramatic highs and dramatic lows, especially with, the energy of Aries burning hot and bright and fast and then needing to cool off. Venus will retrograde back into Pisces, which is your fourth house of home, family, and emotional security. And so those themes will shift, and you'll be invited to reassess kind of, the roots and the way that your home and your life supports or hinders your creative passions and how you express yourself. Venus rules for you your sixth house and 11th house. So finding a healthy balance between creative freedom and responsibilities. Your work or health routines may need some adjustments. Friendships or long-term goals may also be impacted during this time to some extent. Are your social connections and aspirations aligned with your values and what you're trying to do creatively? During this time, you might start a new exciting romantic relationship only for it to face instability or for it not to last too long, or even an ex might come back from the past during this time to introduce a moment of fun and joy and pleasure that's not necessarily long-lasting. You might revisit old family dynamics that are influencing your emotional well-being and how you show up in relationships and how you show up, in terms of your values and your desires. And you might reevaluate friendships or any collaborative projects and prioritize personal creative growth during this time. For my Capricorn risings, this is happening in your fourth house of home and family. And so that's kind of going to be the area of emphasis as Venus stations retrograde. You might feel motivated to make bold changes in your home life or your family life or your living environment, but it could create tension with other people that you share that space with, whether that be family members or partners or whoever you live with at home, children. And with Venus retrograding from Aries back into Pisces in your third house, communication, learning, and your local connections will take more of a focus here. Reflecting on your daily interactions, on how they support you or how they hinder you, or how they might limit your sense of security might be a theme during this time. For you, Venus rules the fifth house of creativity and pleasure and romance, and your 10th house of career and public ambitions. And so are you making enough space in your life for joy and passion during this time? Are you balancing your personal life and your professional career in a way that is aligned with what you value and what you want? And is it creating a harmonious balance in your life, or is it creating conflict? And where do you need to assert yourself and create boundaries in those areas in order to make something that's a little bit more balanced for you? You might find yourself impulsively redecorating. You could be remodeling your home, but you might encounter setbacks or delays during this time due to the retrograde nature of Venus. You might experience tension between your career demands and your family responsibilities. I could easily see this being a time where your career is really busy, but your home life's really busy, and you're kind of riding this tension of like, what do I desire? Do I desire to be a family person, or do I desire to be a work person? What's more important? What do my actions reflect in terms of my desires? That type of kind of energy. And you might reconnect with your siblings or even neighbors or your local connections to address unresolved issues that come up, or maybe there's some kind of tension that needs to be addressed through the Venus retrograde. And when it moves into Pisces, it's this opportunity to allow for some kind of healing or some kind of remedy of that situation. For my Aquarius risings, this is happening in your third house of communication, short-term travel, local connections, daily routines, that kind of thing. You might feel inspired to express yourself boldly in your environment, but that could lead to misunderstandings. Or you might find yourself wanting to express yourself, verbally in a way that's very active and fiery, but then find that it's leading to a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunications. Venus will retrograde back into your second house, bringing a focus onto finances, possessions, values, and self-worth. And so you're invited to reassess your spending habits and how you value yourself, and how oftentimes where we spend our money and how we manage our money and what we think about money can be a reflection on our self-worth and our value and how we feel about ourselves. For you, Venus rules your fourth house and your ninth house. So fourth house being home and family, ninth house being higher learning and beliefs and philosophies. Are you finding emotional security in your local environment? Are you in a neighborhood that, is emotionally fulfilling for you and you feel safe and comfortable? Or is it, have you outgrown your environment and do you need to change that? With the ninth house, are your daily actions aligned with your broader vision? The ninth house is the joy of the sun. It's our beliefs, it's our worldview. How are we embodying those in our daily actions, and where are we disconnected? During this time, you might boldly express ideas only to have them, be interpreted as conflictual or, aggressive and lead to misunderstanding and miscommunications. You might reevaluate your spending habits to better align with long-term goals and what you're trying to accomplish. And you might find unexpected opportunities to learn or to travel, and this might shift your perspective in terms of these themes. Last, but certainly never least, we've got our Pisces risings. For you, this is happening in your second house of finances, material possessions, and self-worth. It'll retrograde back into your first house of personal identity, self-expression, and physical well-being. So with Venus and Aries in your second house, you might feel motivated to pursue bold financial ventures that, when Venus goes retrograde, might find some delays or setbacks through the process. You could find gains, in your financial endeavors, but you might also find some losses or some setbacks temporarily. And with it retrograding back into your first house, it might be a time to reconnect with your core values and how you present yourself to the world. How we show up in the world in terms of our first house and how we embody who we are is a direct reflection of our second house values and self-worth. And so with Venus going between these two houses, it really highlights this need to reconnect and make sure that we're showing up in the way that is authentic to our values and what we truly want to highlight about ourselves. In your chart, Venus rules the third house of communication and learning and local environment. So those themes will be weaved in. And it also rules your eighth house of shared resources, intimacy and transformation, fears and anxieties. So those themes will also be connected to this process. Are you effectively expressing your needs and your values with, the third house connection? And are you navigating financial and emotional dependencies in a way that's healthy? Or are you letting people drag you around? Or are you asserting yourself in a way that's domineering? Where can you bring more diplomacy and more balance to your intimate connections, whether those are emotional or financial? During this time, you might find yourself taking bold financial risks only to reconsider them during the retrograde. Not a great time to maybe buy a house or do a big purchase during this time until after Venus is direct. You might experience personal growth through a renewed sense of identity and how you relate to other people. Other people oftentimes mirror back to us our flaws and our strengths. And so seeing that during this process could, lead to some spiritual growth or some spiritual insight about your identity and yourself. And this might be a time where you reconnect with your creative or spiritual practices that reaffirm your values or embody your values in a way that is, a true creative expression of what you want to show up as in the world. So that's what I've got for Venus retrograde in Aries. It's going to be a little bit prickly, maybe a little bit of, conflict, a little bit intense. Ultimately, it's about revisiting old relationship patterns, old dynamics in terms of how we relate to other people, financial habits even. It's not just about chaos and intensity and passion and drive during this time. It's a chance to realign our values and our desires with something that's more true and authentic and centered around, personal sovereignty and independence. This retrograde is ultimately asking us, to try to strike a balance between our personal desires and what we want and what we want to go after in terms of our independence, but also nurturing our connections with others and how we relate to other people and our sense of self-worth. And so take this time during Venus retrograde to slow down, to reflect, to maybe let some of the past lessons come to life, revisit those 8-year cycles and kind of see what lessons keep repeating that need to be looked at, and see what's coming full circle and see what needs to be kind of revised and reassessed. Whether you're inspired to create, to heal, to reconnect, or, any of those things, just trust the process. Any kind of personal conflict that arises or financial conflict or creative tension that rises, just know that it's part of the process, and give yourself some breathing room, give other people some breathing room, a little bit of grace, a little bit of compassion during this process so that we can all kind of go through this together in a way that's meaningful and productive. And so ultimately at the end of the Venus retrograde cycle, something will be a little bit more clear and something will be a little bit more balanced about those Venusian themes that we covered. Keep an eye on how these themes unfold in your life. Again, this happens every 8 years, so these will come up again in 8 years. So remember, we're all navigating this together. So you're not the only one that's trying to assert their independence. You're not the only one that might be having some tensions in these areas of your life during this time. During this time, there's a lot of planets that are in detriment or fall. So we're all going through it. Just a little bit of compassion, a little bit of grace, a little bit of love goes a long way. As always, if you like this content, give this video a like. It really helps. Comment below on which house is that this will be affecting for you in your chart and how you expect those to manifest for you during this time. And if you like this content, subscribe. It really helps. So yeah, until next time, guys, take care.